Good evening and welcome to the August 21st, 2023 Policy Committee meeting of the School District of Haverford Township. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And before we get started going through tonight's agenda, I just wanted to introduce some members of the administration and our council who are here with us. We've got Dr. Rushi, the superintendent, Justin Barbetta from Whistler, our solicitor's office, and then we have Ms. Jen Saxa, the assistant superintendent, and Trish McCunney, who is going to help us take notes and keep track of changes and keep this committee moving. So thank you for joining us. And I will turn it over to Ms. Snodgrass to walk us through the agenda.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a full agenda tonight, as we always do. I think what we'll do is go until shy of 9 o'clock and just see how much we can get through. And we'll start, I think, with some that we have previously discussed and hopefully can get through kind of quickly. So I think the first one that we want to bring back to this committee that we've talked about before is policy 210.1, possession of asthma inhalers and Epi-Pens. The committee has talked about that one a couple times. There was a different policy 210 that I believe has gone and passed through the board. And this one was held back because there were some questions about how it's being used in the high school, the middle school, how it was being implemented, and we needed a clarification on the difference between elementary schools and upper schools. So I don't know if there have been changes since the last one or just clarifications. Okay.
So the changes, the first change that was made since we last discussed this, if you look at the section titled guidelines, there are 3 points under guidelines, and if you look immediately following the third point, we have removed asthma inhaler. For the viewing of the board, that's the sentence that follows directly under item H in number 3. So asthma inhaler has been removed. And within that, we've also added the sentence, the student shall notify the school nurse within the class period following the use of the asthma inhaler.
Right, and just for the board's clarification, we were asked to use the policy manual drafts on board docs to make sure that we're all just looking at the same document, because I know that sometimes, and these go through a lot of different people, which we're really grateful for. There's a lot of people within the district that take a look at all of these policies and make changes, and so changes are happening maybe up until a meeting, and we just want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing. So we're looking at 2022 policy manual drafts on board docs, which is something that the board can see, and that shows the green additions and the red revision. So given this, does anyone still have questions on this policy or suggested revisions?
I do have some questions. I do find this policy can be a little bit cumbersome because Epi-Pens and inhalers are very different things and used in very different kind of ways. So in my experience, Epi-Pens aren't given unless it's an emergency. And so having medication that is sometimes given in emergency situations and sometimes an inhaler is not, and sometimes it is, it just makes for a little bit cumbersome language. Which just leads me, so with Epi-Pens, if I went to the document that was the opt-out of the Epi-Pen document, and in that there's language there that says the treatment for anaphylaxis is prompt administration of epinephrine and transport to emergency medical services to the nearest hospital emergency department. So that's in the opt-out information. In this policy, there's no next step. So there's clear information in those 1, 2, 3 about what a district staff would do about providing the Epi-Pen. But then I'm just curious, like, what next? Because it isn't something you're supposed to just give to a kid and send them back to class. So I'm just curious if we need another, like a number 4, or if there's a different process the nurses want us to have in the policy. Because it just seems important to me that, like, the next step after an EpiPen is actually emergency services usually, so.
So that
Are you
would
looking
be
at-
in this,
sorry.
I was gonna just clarify, that's, under the heading special procedures for epinephrine auto injector.
That
There's one,
seems,
two,
like, that
three,
seems like
four.
when I'm reading 1, 2, 3,
Mhm.
it just felt like there needed to be like a 4 or something of like, what else do you do? Do you send the kid back to class? You shouldn't. So again, just want to make sure that we're really clear on what the steps need to be.
Just so I'm following Dr. McKay, when you're reading 1, 2, 3,
Further down, there's a heading that's called special procedures, right there.
okay.
And it's
So
special
maybe is there a
procedures just
4?
for the EpiPen.
Is there a 4 to notify parents and guardians?
I don't know. This is like where I would want the nurses, because I'm sure the nurses do this. And so
the
it's,
nurses have reviewed this,
okay.
and so,
I'm just thinking on like the EpiPen package, it doesn't say like, take this EpiPen and then go about your business. Like then you call emergency services. So just legally, I'm just curious, do we need to have that in the policy?
notification beyond that, just for clarification,
Yeah,
notification.
this is more a question. I'm not demanding we make the change, but it's just like, for me, it feels like legally, we should probably have another step in there.
I do see, Dr. McKay, you're on the opt-out form, the emergency epinephrine is, and it says how it's used, and it says the treatment is prompt administration of epinephrine and transport by emergency. Like, that part is clear.
Yeah,
In
and
the
that's in the
opt-out
opt-out form.
So your suggestion for the
For,
special procedures is to add a 4 that would,
Like
Indicate.
proposal of if that makes sense, but I just am curious legally if we need to have something like that, given that there is
The
an
opt-out.
emergency level to
Yeah,
it.
the well, so, Dr. McKay, this is specifically referencing, the opt-out. And so, I mean, not necessarily, I guess is the answer, because we are giving them the form at the beginning of the year, and they're saying, in the event that this situation arises, I'm saying, don't administer to my child.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand that. The opt-out form just had that language,
Right.
but our form about the policy of administering EpiPens in the school doesn't have the language at all about what do you do next. That's why my question.
I don't think I understand the,
so I think if it's in the process that a situation presents itself where someone assesses that an EpiPen is the appropriate thing to do, and it is the right medication that we have available, and it is then administered per all of these things, then I think the suggestion is to have a 4 that is some sort of evaluation for, to be taken to or looked at by emergency personnel, or as
Yeah,
Dr.
I-
Rushi suggested, notification of a parent or guardian.
I think it could be either or. But to take it, I'll take it out of this context, and I'm kind of speaking in generalities. I think there are a number of situations that will arise during the school day where you're kind of in that same position, and maybe we don't necessarily explicitly state that that's what we're going to do. It's optional. I'll put it that way, because it's in the same category of issues that may arise where this may be an emergent situation. What do we do next? Well, we're either going to seek emergent care for the student. We're going to call the student's family, notify them. So, you could put it in there, or or you don't necessarily have to.
I guess for me, this isn't the same as like other medication that you're waiting and seeing. If you give an EpiPen, you're giving it because you think the person is in anaphylaxis. And if you're in anaphylaxis, the EpiPen only lasts for about 10 to 15 minutes. So you need emergency
Sure, and
personnel.
sometimes you need a second administrator.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
daughter has.
Yeah, so does mine. And so it's
No, I
like,
get it.
it's like, I just feel like if we're doing a policy that is taking into consideration something that is an emergency situation, it seems like there needs to be a next step
Yeah.
of what do you do next?
So, and just basing it off of this specific school code section, the answer is not necessarily. But to your point about being reasonable and best practices and trying to be transparent with the family as far as what's going on, that's why I'm saying you certainly could add that.
Okay.
So if
For
I could
medical
just,
personnel.
I'm sorry, if I could just add an addition, I'm an Epi-Pen user. And so I guess to Dr. McKay's point, my concern would be if a student was given their EpiPen or administered their EpiPen, they could appear to be fine, and 30 minutes later they would again decline. Their airways could block even faster than when it initially happened. So my concern is, let's just say we leave it as is. Has the EpiPen, we follow the procedure, we contact their parent or guardian, and they're fine. When they go to class and they're suddenly not fine, what type of legal problems would we be in as a school district if we didn't say our policy is flat out 30 minutes, they have to have emergency services, just so that it's crystal clear? Because I would hate for us to be in a situation where hindsight is 2020, we simply could have just adjusted our language just to ensure that we're protecting our school district and also protecting our students.
Yeah, so, and again, I think that, there are several layers to that analysis, and one is if your nurses or your teachers or whomever is administering in good faith, and the student appears to be okay, and there's also layers of immunity that you have that come along with being a political subdivision entity as well. So from a strictly legal analysis, if you were to say, this is what was prescribed for this particular student, we followed through with that, we did that when this situation arose. From a purely liability analysis, I think you would in most instances, you'd probably be on solid ground, safe footing, however you want to phrase it. But as far as the best practice scenario, because we're all kind of aware of that issue, and we're talking about the entire student body, not just a specific student whose prescription may be a single administration. That's why it's totally fine to add that type of language as a bullet point 4. Did I answer that question?
Yes.
Okay.
What would you propose to add? Contacting?
Yeah, I think it would be contact with emergency medical personnel and notification to the parent, guardian, or family.
Is there language you want to take directly from the opt-out form? If we like it there and just mirror it, or no?
I don't necessarily think so.
Okay.
Yeah, that is more specific in saying
Yeah.
transport by emergency medical services. I think the proposed language from Mr. Barbetta captures a little more input and evaluation on what's the appropriate next step.
Okay.
So with the addition of a number 4 that provides an additional step after the use of an EpiPen for contact with emergency medical personnel and notification of a parent and guardian, would this policy with the other changes noted be ready to go to committee? Go from committee to the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those changes are minimal enough that we can make them and move it forward at the September.
Right, it would just be adding one
7th, thanks.
line, and then we'll have the first reading
September
on
7th.
September 7th, and then we can discuss it further at that point.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, is the policy gonna link to the opt-out form?
Yes.
It does.
Just like it does here, yeah. At the very bottom.
It's all, you have to go
Oh,
all
I see.
the way
Okay,
down,
yeah,
yeah.
okay.
You have to go past those citations.
It's an attachment.
I missed that.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay.
So in a separate but unrelated note, I can no longer see the policies at the bottom.
What do you mean?
Like typically I can see they're where now?
I'll show you.
Oh, the
Okay.
attachments?
Yeah, am I missing them? Cause I'm like,
Yes, yeah.
okay,
Jen can look with her.
Okay.
Thanks, Jen.
okay.
So hopefully this one is quick.
Mhm.
Famous last words. But, there was a suggestion for policy 214, which is the class profile, which was adopted February 1st, 1962. And last revised April 22nd, 1999. If for that policy to be removed as something that is superfluous.
It is it's a practice that, I mean, first of all, it's not a required policy. It is a practice that the district has had in place for a long time. It routinely occurs. I don't even know if people at high school know that it's a policy, but it's that much of a practice that routinely occurs. There's no need. So that, like, in looking at what is the purpose of any policy that we have, there is no need for this policy.
Which number is it?
214, sorry.
So it's not in the drafts because we're trying to get rid of it.
It
Okay.
should be in, yeah, it should be in your, 214
is not in my drafts.
Are you
That's
under
interesting.
2022 policy manual drafts?
That's weird.
Jen?
Watch my board.
Oh, now it is. Now it is. Okay.
Just having Jen
Yeah,
come down.
I got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
It's weird.
So my question, so is it specifically junior year? Because, I mean, having been on the board almost 4 years, I feel like I'm constantly getting informed with grades and with the class profile, and so that's what kind of struck me. I was like, oh, this is really funny, that it's just this specific junior year, starting with the class of 2000. But,
Well, I will say as a parent of a rising senior, that it is something that's on the website that you look at, and it does, I think not just for our own community, but probably for representatives of universities that are looking to assess kind of where Haverford fits in. It is a piece that's on the website that has, the number and listing of all the AP and honors classes and the class size and the kind of grades, how our GPAs are calculated and distributions and stuff like that, and it does each year point to the data for that junior class who are now the seniors that are applying to colleges and having, I figure that's probably one prominent use of it. There may be others, I don't know if,
That's
That's
what Jen was
exactly it.
gonna
That's, I mean, I think you did a better job than I would have there. Yes, that's exactly what we do.
College
Yep.
applications are
Yep.
getting ready, so we're looking at stuff.
so I guess the question is, do you think we need a policy for it, or?
Probably like we don't need a policy to say on the website should be X, Y, and Z information
Yeah.
about the
Yeah,
district.
no, it's something that colleges would ask for if we didn't have it.
Yeah,
So,
right, and
there's
it's-
it's a part of the system.
Okay.
So our recommendation is that we would repeal the policy, so it would come to the full board, and so that it would share at that meeting that where administration has recommended repeal. It will then come back here. Because this policy is not really anything that would be controversial in nature or that, but down the road,
Famous last
there
words.
could be. There could be one, so you want to make sure you have plenty of opportunity for people to know that you're considering the repeal of the policy and to comment on that.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, so since I've been on the board, I don't think we have repealed a policy.
No.
So does it go through 3 readings to repeal?
No.
No,
No.
okay. Just curious the process
Mhm.
of that happens.
That was my question
Yeah,
too.
okay, yeah. So, okay, thanks.
Great. 2 policies, 22 minutes. So the next one that we wanted to go through is policy 246, school wellness, nutrition, and physical activity. I don't think that this policy committee has reviewed this, but it was last revised by the board November 2020. So it has, it's not an old policy,
No.
and,
It's required to be reviewed, so
Mhm.
2020 is reviewed in 2023, it would come back up again in 2026.
Yep,
It's,
and-
required for that review.
looks like to me there are very minimal revisions to this.
Mhm.
I don't know if these were administrative revisions or?
Yes.
And there's
Okay.
a committee.
And there is the
Right, there's a committee.
Wellness Committee that reviewed this. Nicole held a virtual drop-in session for the committee members as well, that Nicole being Nicole Battistelli, so that members could drop in, talk with her, virtually talk with her, ask questions about the policy. There are a few, I would call them editing, capitalizing the D in district throughout the document. As you get to the section titled Physical Activity, they added in activities of indoor and outdoor recess, only because these are things that occur already. It's not adding to things that occur. So they added that, and I'd say the most substantive revision, if you want to use that word, the way that under the healthcare section, we have the language regarding BMI to be reflective of the most recent policy that you did approve, so that language mirrors the same thing there, indicating that the measurement will be taken individually and made available to parents, guardians upon request.
And that, yep, it is a state mandated.
And the last thing in there is the list of healthy foods, beverages, alternatives to staff, parents, and guardians. And that is attached at the bottom with the smart snack order form, should
Okay.
parents want to do that for
Wanna go that route?
celebrations.
Great.
Does anyone have any comments or questions on the policy itself or any of the revisions?
I mean, I'll just continue to make a comment that I really look forward to the day the state doesn't require the BMI anymore, because it is a really faulty, terrible measure. So, just keep making that a public statement.
I just had two minor comments. In the BMI section, the first sentence just seems to be an incomplete sentence. Measurement is taken or something. You see what I'm saying? Is that
In the
just me
green
that's reading it?
highlighted part?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a complete
Just the first
sentence.
sentence, like it doesn't have a.
There's no
it's not-
action.
Yeah, yeah. So just, it's just an editing thing. So edit that. And then I was wondering, since this is mandated by the state,
Definition of it.
is there like is there a school code that we should be referencing somewhere? Because it is state mandated.
Good
I
point.
think they're just minor comments though.
Yeah.
Or we can just reference the policy
Yeah, that's
that
fine
we
too.
have.
But other than that, I just have those two small comments.
Okay.
I mean, there might be a way just to make sentence 1 and sentence 2 one sentence.
One sentence, yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Yeah.
Fairly minor. Other than that, I didn't have.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I don't know, would it be better to reference the state statute that mandates this, or state reference our own policy for the BMI?
You could do both.
Love it. Okay,
People can get all the information.
we'll reference both.
I think it's a good idea to link the state.
Mhm.
So it just shows again, it's not our choice.
It's not us.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Dr. McKay, thank you for your work with
Yes.
with that committee. That's additional meetings throughout the year.
Anything else on school wellness, nutrition, and physical activity?
Are we okay bringing that forward on this?
Mhm.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so just, I think, a verb is needed
Mhm.
in the first sentence, or the
And
second
then the
paragraph.
citation,
And then the citation, yep, those are the only two comments, so I think we're good.
thank you.
And this policy is in effect, so if anybody's watching this and saying like safe foods list, like these guidelines, I mean, the attachments may have been kind of updated, but they have been in place, and there are things that people can reference for the school year even.
The
before-
attachments are updated, but interestingly, I was just preparing my things tomorrow. When I meet with new teachers, I go over a couple of the policies with them, and wellness is one,
Okay,
to let them know that there is a safe foods list. So I will be letting them know that it is in revision with just some minor modifications. is it okay to go to 623?
Yes, let's go to 623. Continuing disclosure of financial information for bond issues, proposed new policy. Does our solicitor want to give an introduction of this, or Dr. Rushi?
Oh, our solicitor.
You didn't want to, okay.
Sure. So, this series of items, so it's policy 623. There
Two
is a
ARs.
proposed AR1 to accompany 623, which is the continuing disclosure administrative regulation. And then there's proposed AR number 2, which is post-issuance compliance and record retention for tax-exempt and tax-advantaged bonds. These documents were all shared with us from the district's bond council. These were authored by the district's bond council. You'll see on AR number 2, there's also a series of 4 exhibits that are accompanying the AR. They also drafted those documents. So generally speaking, these are procedures that the district has always been following, and what the bond council noted is that when you're going through any kind of a bonding process, a lot of times what comes up is they're being asked to share copies of the policy, explicit policy, and so even though there may be internal documentation confirming that these are the procedures that were in place dating back to year X or Y, their best practices recommendation is to have an explicit policy within the policy manual. So the only thing that my office did was there was some minor stylistic editing to keep it in line as much as possible with the current policies in the manual. And other than that, everything was drafted by your bond council.
This looks pretty specific to practices in the marketplace, and like you said, is outlining protocols for regular compliance, right? Like this is not saying, oh, by policy we can change the means or the process by which we raise funds. It doesn't change the limits on, like, it doesn't do anything with our bonding or us raising monies. It is specifically around remaining in compliance, providing the appropriate documentation, going through those checklists. So yeah, I think I am fine taking the
Recommendation
advice
of bond,
recommendation
council
of
and our
bond
solicitor.
counsel on this very technical, this technical set of policies that will aid the district in future fundraising, so we can point to this and show bond issuers that we are prepared to uphold the reporting requirements under those bonds.
I agree, and I do just want to remind the board and the public that because these are really specific and clearly were taken from our practices and best practices, we want them to be current, and I know that it does take a long time for policies to go through the board, but I think that's why our council has suggested for so much of the details to be in the administrative regulations, which we don't need to vote on, but we do need to be notified of when there's a change. And so I appreciate that as well, making sure that this is a nimble document, something that when the practice changed, when the law changes, the administrative regulations can change easier than going through 2 readings and a vote. But I think that what's necessary in the policy is in the actual policy itself. So.
We move them forward on this 7th.
Yeah, I think so. No one wants to have an in-depth discussion on SEC policies, on bond. No.
IRS.
I think we should, yeah. Let's comply.
Let's comply. Yeah,
you,
I
everybody.
guess I'll just extend a thank you to our bond counsel and our solicitor for taking a look at this and putting it together. That is much appreciated. Okay. No notes, I guess. Okay, so I think the next one to take a look at then is, we could do, policy 215, promotion and retention.
Okay. So in policy 215, that pertains to, as Antoinette indicated, the promotion and retention of students. We've added academic into the purpose. You can see the areas identified with in the green text would be new language there. So that students shall be advanced in a continuous pattern of achievement that's consistent with their individual development. In the authority section, superintendent or designee will oversee the implementation of the policy. And then we've got the general guidelines, some, again, I'll call them editing, changes that are made to that in keeping consistent language with other policy documents. And then we added the two pieces about reasonable efforts being made to remediate a student's difficulties before the student is retained, and providing parents with written notification as soon as possible.
I did have one question, and it's kind of a question for the rest of the board. The statement that doesn't actually, it's not one of the changes, but it's under the general guidelines, it's the second paragraph, where it says retention is most effective at the first grade level. I'm not arguing that that is true. I'm just curious, does that need a citation or something that backs up that statement of retention is most effective at first grade? Just seems to be something that's not common knowledge, but might be more effective.
I think that actually didn't surprise me. I know that I went to a different public school in Pennsylvania, and there was actually T1, right? Transitional first grade.
Yeah.
And it was very common, actually.
Oh, yeah, no, I know
Yeah.
it's true, but it's one of those, it's one of those things of like, I mean, honestly, if a student turned this
Cite
paper
the
into me,
source.
I would be
Yeah.
like, you need to cite your
Right,
source
yeah.
here. Because it's not something that just the average person knows, which is
Yeah.
kind of the rule around citation. So I just was curious if folks thought that we needed to have that in the policy, or if we're comfortable moving it forward without it.
Mhm.
I think a citation would be helpful. When I read the sentence, I instantly thought, I wonder where that came from. So I had the same sort of mindset there.
I guess my question is, what would be a source that would be authoritative? And a separate question would be, is it also based on experience, the district's experience?
Well, maybe we add that into the language then.
I was
As
gonna
the
suggest,
district's
yeah.
experience is shown, or something like that. So
Yeah.
that in a sense, we're citing it, but not an official citation.
Mm-hmm.
I also would throw another possibility is that, do we need that sentence?
Mm.
Because if there comes a time where we may need to, district has to retain a student in the 4th or 5th grade, where there'll be someone that hangs their hat on, who I thought
Why
was
didn't
supposed to
you
do it in first
do
grade.
this in first grade?
So are we, creating more possibilities for questions or pushback with that sentence there?
Could very well be. Mhm.
Saxa, what do you think?
I think as a general rule, we try not to retain students. So fortunately, we don't have a whole lot of experience to say in the district experience, it's better.
Okay.
The retention that may happen more frequently might be a 9th grader not getting enough credits to be considered a sophomore in the first try, and they have to take some of those at the beginning of sophomore year, and then by the end of sophomore year, now they're fully a sophomore. So I do think that it may be giving some indication of something that isn't necessarily how things typically go.
And maybe it's an older practice too, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It was last reviewed in 2010, which is now 13 years
So,
ago.
right.
I think if the district is fine removing that sentence, that might be the best. Because I agree, I don't think anyone, it could be two things. Obviously, the concerns of Dr. King and Dr. McKay, but also it could be seen as something that we're sort of expecting some students to always be left back in first grade, which doesn't seem to be the practice in the district.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with striking that sentence.
And I'm just curious about the first sentence then of that paragraph as well. So it's, as a general rule, no student shall be retained for more than 1 year. There might be some rare case that there, I mean, I'm like, do we need that statement as well? Is that informative enough to have it in here? Is it important to keep it in here?
I wondered if that's 1 year over K to 12
Consecutive,
or
or-
or if it meant
Mhm.
like you don't repeat a grade
More than
one
once.
And is it
And if
really a
so, then
gen-
we just need a little bit more language. Sorry, Dr. King.
No, I'm sorry, like, is it really a general rule?
Mm-hmm.
That's like a question, like, is that,
How we would classify that.
yeah.
I think we are cognizant of trying to keep students of similar ages
Yeah.
in the same grade. So you may find an older student getting held back twice over the career might put that child
Yeah.
3 years older than the other students in their class. So that could be part of the intention of keeping some kind of guide, and maybe it's not a rule, maybe it's just
Right.
as a guideline.
Or maybe the district strives to, and not like a general rule.
Yeah, and that goes to a point I was gonna make, which is, I like this sentence, that reasonable efforts shall be made, to remediate, I think, a student's difficulties before they are retained. But I'd actually like to make the district the actor there, because I think the district is the actor in that sentence. Or maybe we're thinking I guess I just think that the district should be making reasonable efforts, to remediate a student's difficulty before they're retained. And then we could add something there as well, which is to just say, the district strives for no student to be retained more than 1 year. And so combine those two concepts together, which is the district is trying to work hard to not have anyone be held back, and then especially, that second year.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And combine that. Okay, we can do that. All right.
Okay.
We will prepare that with the wording that we've captured here tonight. And what I'd like to do is send it forward for first reading. And if you feel that we
Yeah.
didn't adequately capture the conversation, it can come back to the committee.
That sounds good. All right. So next on the agenda is policy 800, records retention, which is a personal favorite of mine. So I'd like to see this one move forward too.
I'm just pulling it up on my screen.
If we could get just a sort of overview of this policy, why it's needed, because it would be a new policy.
Yes.
And so why it would be needed, why it's being suggested to be added, maybe by our solicitor?
Actually, the district approached the solicitor's office about such a policy. Without such a policy, you can imagine 1,000 employees, 6,000, almost 700 students a year, and how long things are kept. And it's not just a matter of paper and folders that are in offices, it's server space. And it's the management of all of that. So we were looking at how do we be responsible in maintaining the information, and some files, there are clear directions on how long they need to be held. Others, not so much. So that's why we asked the solicitor for such a policy, perhaps looking at some of the other districts that our solicitor works with. So, if you wanna-
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, Dr. Rushi. So this document set that's here is a very short policy document with a more robust administrative regulation, which has carve-outs for things like litigation holds or legal procedures. And then accompanying that administrative regulation is the records retention chart. And I think we talked about this several months ago, but that records retention chart is not original material. It's actually something that PSBA drafted a number of years ago. And there's a lot of explanations within that chart as far as specific recommendations for numbers of years that PSBA is suggesting documents or materials be maintained for. And in some cases, it is worth noting that they recommend longer periods of time than the actual statutory requirements, but that's because they're related to things like personnel or particular sets of records that may be business related or litigation related, things like that. So I think they kind of erred on the side of maintaining things longer, which would be the same recommendation that we would make to the district as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think this policy is really important to have for a couple reasons. The first one is so that all of our staff and personnel understand what their requirements are, and having a chart like that is really helpful. The default, I think, for some people is going to be keep it forever, right? And then that leads to the problem, right? That's the current default, is to keep it forever. The default for other people might be, you know what, I don't use this document, let's get rid of it, and that might not be appropriate. And it's really good for the staff to have that sort of direction, but it's also good for the district from a liability standpoint to have consistency and to have a rule around this, so that if there ever is an issue where you do need to find documents and there is a statutory limit or, requirement as to how long you need to take it, we have the policy in place that says that our staff is supposed to keep it that long. Or we have something that says, our records retention is 3 years, and so we kept it for that long and we don't have it anymore. And so I do think this would be a really important and valuable policy for the board to adopt and for the district to have use of.
Just a question, I know this had come to committee previously. I'm trying to recall why. Is it still in committee?
Because it was one of those meetings where we got to it towards the end of the
Okay.
meeting. So we really didn't discuss much. We just pointed out that there was a chart
Right.
attached
Okay.
with it.
My notes was that there was no substantive
Yeah.
discussion, just that it was
Right.
being
It's there.
introduced.
And what the
Yeah.
board's looking at doesn't have marked changes or anything, so,
No,
right.
because it's new, it's a
We
new
didn't talk
policy.
about it.
Yep, okay.
I mean, I'm just thinking this is still a long time for a lot of these records. Like, the medical records of students we keep for 6 years after their enrollment ends. That is a lot of records.
So when IT comes and looks for a budget for cloud storage and
Yeah.
server stuff, we understand why.
Just a question, in the policy itself, is there a reason why it cites so many of our policies down below, under legal?
Yes.
Okay, I just
Beca-
hadn't seen that before.
No,
Okay,
and it's unique because so many of these policies incorporate different records that are then
okay.
saved on the back end.
So policies that create the generation of a record are being referenced on how
Yes.
to retain and eliminate the records after
Yes.
their useful life.
Yeah, for example, I think, I'm just looking at the bottom, 907, I think, was the visitor policy that we revised last year. So there's a recommended period of time to maintain visitor logs within the buildings.
One question on school board records, just looking at that chart that they suggest, it says the official recordings of board meetings, it's only 1 year of completion, 1 year after completion. Is that like the videos as well?
I think their recommendation for the videos themselves is 1 year.
Okay.
And then I think I don't have it right in front of me at this point, Dr. McKay, I think the
No, I'm just curious.
my recollection of the recommendation for approved minutes is forever.
Yeah.
But then I think kind of like draft documents related to is the 1 year.
Okay.
I think that's
Yeah.
the distinction.
Yeah, interesting.
But it's not like the district is then going to go on to YouTube and delete videos after a year, right? Or yes, they are.
Well, it's really your preference. I mean, if you're adopting a policy that's saying we're gonna maintain these for a year, if that's something that you choose to do, then you certainly can. I mean, unless something, like we said, is legally required to be maintained for a specific number of years, if you're saying you're going to only save it for so long, then you could move forward with it.
I think we should move forward with it. I think that we should have, our practice should reflect the policy. And so to the extent that our policy says to retain it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, that should be, to the best of the district's ability, what they do. I think that's how you are protected by your policy, is if you follow it.
And there was actually, in preparing for this meeting, I didn't want to throw anyone off guard, there was one additional revision that I wanted to suggest to the committee within the retention template, because this was drafted several years ago. More recently, the Pennsylvania legislature abolished the statute of limitations for child abuse victims. So there's a recommendation, I think, for like 50 years here, but I would recommend that we change that to make that indefinite retention. If there's some document related to alleged abuse.
And again, this would be part of the AR, so it wouldn't need a full board vote to change those types of timeframes. It would just need notification of the board.
But the document that we have, the records retention chart, although it's based on PSBA recommendations, that is ours. Like, we've edited it to be what we're proposing. Is that correct? Or is that just,
Yes,
we've taken
even-
what PSBA?
And actually, the one that stands out, if you look at emails, that's there in we're 4 years.
Uh-huh.
That would be the longest period of time that we would be storing.
So like the red is our edits to that document? Is that what the red is?
Yes, I believe there are only 2.
Okay.
We wanted to reflect a little further down, Dr. McKay, security tapes and
Yep.
images. You may recall very recently, Rob Anderson and Kevin
Mhm.
DiPaolo were talking, and that is our current practice, 2 weeks.
Okay.
So it reflects that.
Okay, and yeah, and then the one that's above it, though, lets you know if there's some reasons, something was pulled for a reason, then you hold on
Then
to
you
it.
would hold on.
I would say then, if under school board records, the official recordings of board meetings is only 1 year, I think that's not very long.
I agree.
I would be far more comfortable if we're required to hold on to video recordings longer than that. So if we're wanting to make sure we follow this, then I think I would recommend we give more time.
What are you thinking?
I don't know. I just think a year is really fast.
What is the current length? I mean, do we have?
Everything currently is indefinitely.
It's indefinite, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I wasn't
So-
sure, I was just board meetings were part of that, but I mean, I think right now, we have meetings that date back to about, but what I mean is, what are the oldest meetings that we have recorded? I think I've seen the last ones like in 2020 or 2019, maybe?
I don't know.
I'm not-
I guess the question for the board would be, of what use are those prior
Mhm.
board meetings? Because just like old policies,
Mhm.
it becomes something that seems useful, but isn't, right? Because it's no longer the practice of the board, maybe no longer the thoughts of the board, maybe something has
Members
come
may
to
be
light
different,
that has
yeah.
changed people's opinions. And so looking at something that somebody said 10 years ago isn't necessarily helpful. And I'm fine with changing it, 1 year is aggressive. And so, I mean, terms are 4 years.
Mhm.
We could just have it match a term.
That's what I was gonna
That makes sense,
suggest.
yeah.
The other thing too, I think, is like some of the things, like we have a lot of capital projects and those span
Yeah.
many years. And so being able to
Good
go
point.
back and review, capital project proposals from a few years ago and then kind of where we are now, like that may be useful to us or maybe
Yep.
members of the public.
Mhm.
Those are a little bit longer.
Those were discussed at committee meetings, I
This
believe,
is for
right?
all
So-
board meetings.
It's for all
It
board
doesn't
meetings?
say-
Board
Okay.
meetings, yeah.
But
It
we'll still
doesn't
have
say
the.
general
Yeah,
or
it
anything,
doesn't.
it just says
Okay.
board
Official
meeting.
recordings.
Official recordings, yeah.
Official recordings. Okay.
I like
We'll s-
4, I did that.
Yeah, four makes sense.
Okay, let's start with that.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments about, I did have a question.
Mhm.
the AR, where did the language come from? Since this is a new policy, did it come from PSBA, other districts? How was this put together?
This is, I'll call it somewhat of a template that we use in some of our other districts. In all candor, PSBA actually just recently released an update to 800, but I'll be completely honest, I think the prior version that you have in front of you is actually more manageable. What the more recent PSBA model speaks to is like a records management designee, so like selecting one administrator from the entire district to have to go around to every single building and kind
Wow.
of oversee that in addition to their regular duties. And then they also talk about a records management committee. So I think, philosophically,
aggressive.
Yeah.
it's kind of esoteric. And
Maybe we
I think
start with this.
this is
Yeah,
a
let's
little-
Yes.
start here.
Yes.
Let's start with getting rid of some really
Yes.
old documents.
Yeah, we would be happy with that.
Yeah. Okay. So I
Great.
don't think we had, I think we had some changes to the chart that we wanna
Mhm.
see, but I don't think we had any substantive changes to the policy or the AR. Does the board, or the committee feel comfortable moving this to the board?
Mhm.
We can take the same approach as we were taking with the prior one, and that we will make those revisions,
Yep.
hopefully capturing what was discussed tonight. And when you see that, if you're comfortable with it, then it can continue to move on. Otherwise, no hard feelings, it'll come back.
We get a couple of readings.
Mhm.
Okay. Cruising through.
Yes.
All right, so now there are policies that we've never discussed before, policy or revisions of policies. So the next one is 130, homework.
And this policy was requested that we, take a look at it. There were some questions about homework. And when those questions first arose, we indicated that, yes, there is a policy around that. And after some discussion, then there was a request, could we revisit that policy with a specific attention to the elementary level? So what you see here is a policy that's in existence, and following the other edits and revisions to it. You'll see text that has been added. For example, in purpose, we added maintenance of communication regarding student learning between home and school. When we get to section 3, homework on the elementary level, we put in, practicing math concepts that have already been learned in school. We took out some of the older, I'll use that word to describe older language, specifically like cutting out pictures, beginning word sounds, and added in guardians to be consistent with other language. And you can see those other changes, and Jen is here tonight to speak to any questions people have. I'll just finally call to your attention what you're seeing with the red X's on the left-hand side. That's just where the numbering had to change. So we're not indicating that text would not be part of the policy. The green highlighted text is part of the policy, but it flips the numbering as you go down then.
I had a suggestion in the initial purpose. B is the development of permanent leisure interests in learning. And I thought that wasn't language I had heard us use before, and wondered if we wanted to describe it more in line with our strategic goals of developing lifelong learning habits or something like that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Permanent leisure interests.
So, what, yeah.
But I did like the addition here about to try to make weekly assignments that allow some flexibility around, when families and their students will be able to make time to get things done. And I think that was a nice approach there. And then kind of additional rough timeframes on kind of what to expect is helpful. I was curious about the language, homework should not cause harm. How was that specific language considered or suggested?
We did a review of local districts and what their homework policies and/or procedures were, where there weren't policies. And we found language that sort of referred to this idea that homework should not be causing hardship at home for the child, nor hardship at school for the child. And so and also in speaking or collecting feedback from teachers, principals mentioned that that is a concern for them, is the amount of support that they have at home and the follow-up. And so they wanted to just make sure that, you know, the assignment of homework should not be something that's impacting a child's social and emotional well-being at home or at school. And so that was the language that we chose, and the reasoning behind it.
Okay, yeah, I might suggest
Remove harm. Just
the
keep
word
interference.
harm, I
Yeah.
think, goes to a level of
Hardship.
I thought
Yeah,
hardship
hardship.
and the acknowledgement, and maybe even allow like some language that broadens that, because it is, you know, the stressor, the time, that, and sometimes I think financial could be another consideration, right? We don't want to have families have the expectation of going out and buying extravagant materials and supplemental kind of things, right? So I think that concept of hardship could be useful there instead of the word
Instead of
harm.
Sure. Yep.
Yep.
Other comments?
I wanted to, the elementary level, it seems like there's been the most substantive changes there, and I do appreciate kind of, as was already said, I do appreciate that it allows for, flexibility, and it allows for, teachers to be sort of the one determining the appropriateness to the amount and the frequency, you know, giving some general guidelines, but not mandating. Our previous policy sort of mandated that they had to give a certain amount, and that seemed a little strange. So I appreciate this, you know, provides some suggestions and reiterates the importance of homework, but allows for flexibility, allows for variety, and I like the suggested language change about removing the word harm and changing it to hardship, because I do think that that sort of reflects a more broader set of circumstances. I did want to ask, in this policy, it looks like we use the word child a lot instead of student. Is that something that was done on purpose, or do we want to, I think in most of our other policies, we do use the word student.
Sure.
Do we want to change that just to be consistent, or is there a reason that we would want to keep it as child or children?
No, that was not intentional
Okay.
on my
So
part,
just
so we can replace
For
that. Mhm.
consistency, it's just a minor
Sure.
change. Thank you.
I was just curious, the numbers that were developed for the range with the elementary, was that in like collaboration with the teachers? Did they come up with kind of that time frame?
We did collect some comments from, well, the principal spoke with the teachers about what are they currently doing, what is ideal, what stands in the way of doing the work, and how can we support the work being done. And then we also, as I mentioned, looked around at what other districts are doing. And so these time ranges are in line with what other districts are doing, as well as with the current practices of those who were assigning homework regularly, and didn't go too far outside with assigning too much homework where we would really be out of line with what our neighbors are doing.
15 minutes feels like a lot. That's almost 5 hours a week for a 10-year-old feels like a lot. I don't know.
But some of that might just be reading, like read for 20 minutes.
Read for 50 minutes per night is what it's saying.
Well, no, but that may not be their only homework. I mean, they may not read for 50 minutes, but it could be read 2 chapters for 20 minutes, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then do some math.
They have-
I guess I have a lot of concerns with the numbers here.
Okay.
5 minutes in kindergarten is fine. 50 minutes in 5th grade is a lot. 3 hours in high school feels insane. Well, I guess as an expectation, I mean, do we really, our students work 15 hours of homework every week?
I think, and I believe the policy mentions that sometimes the amount of homework is commensurate with the choices students make about the courses that they are taking. So you might find a student who's taking 3 AP courses who would more typically have 3 hours of homework a night, and a student who is not taking 3 AP courses might have less homework in that evening.
I do think it's important to remember, though, our high schoolers have 4 to 5 classes at a time. They don't have 8 classes at a time. So like, I think that is like just the block scheduling. So it does, like, 3 hours does feel like a little bit high when there's 4 classes. Sometimes they have more if they have quarter classes, but like I mean, it is what it is. I don't really need us to change it. I would say the sentence itself, though, is just cumbersome wording. So the sentence is approximately 3 hours of homework per evening is not considered to be excessive for students taking the mandated courses at the high school. So I'm wondering if it should be language more from like what you were saying, Jen, of like this, I don't know. Because to me, that's not a maximum or a minimum. It's just this shouldn't be considered excessive. Seems kind of a weird thing to have in a policy. If we're
Instead
gonna
of
put a
what-
number to it, let's make it, yeah, I don't know.
Instead of what it's not, say what it is,
Yeah.
is an opportunity for or
I
something.
guess I would feel more comfortable with something that says that it's not every day. Because I certainly understand when you have a test the next day, you're studying. When you have a big project, you're working on it for 3 hours. And so something like there will be times when there are 3 hours of homework per evening in the high school or something like that. And I would feel the same way, it would
Middles.
feel the same way about all of the levels here, which is certainly there are times when, a 10-year-old will have 50 minutes of homework in a night, but having that sustained every day, which is kind of what this is saying, the average daily time expectations, again, Monday through Friday, is 45 to 50 minutes. Not only, I mean, is simply not the case that I've had 2 children in the elementary schools, and it's not the case. But I actually just physically can't imagine it. And the burden that would put on families and students. And so I would just like to see something like, it's not an expectation, but there will be times when it is that much. Does that make sense?
Maybe, do you want to say something like, generally, despite, with some exceptions, the average daily time expectations should not exceed?
No. I definitely don't want to have it should not exceed, because if
Generally
if a
speaking,
student
yeah.
has a project the next day that they didn't work on for a month.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
I mean, the girlfriend's gonna work on it for 5 hours that day, and that is what it is.
Obviously, but I mean, with some exception, I mean, that's what I'm saying, I think it says it in here already, I mean, you'd say with obvious exceptions, or with certain exceptions, I mean, if we want to put a number to it, we should put a number to it,
Why do we wanna put a number?
Yeah, why
to
do you
it?
want to put numbers to
I
it?
thought,
That was my
I
next
thought that was,
question.
I thought that was the discussion
That's my
previously.
overall, that's
Yeah.
obviously my overall comment is the numbers and the words expectations. I like guidelines. I like the first sentence.
Guidelines, yeah, I like
Ms.
guidelines too.
Hexa, when you were reviewing other district policies, were there any that didn't have times?
Let's see, the majority had time-based guidelines per grade. The majority of them did. Not all of them, though.
Do you remember the ones that didn't, like how they phrased their guidelines then, if there weren't times?
Take a look.
And I guess I'm curious, I mean, the policy that had been written had numbers in. So was the discussion within our schools, what's the right number of minutes to assign? Or was it a little bit more like open-ended, like how do we want to approach homework? And I think one of the things that this policy can serve to address is that we've got 5 different elementary schools, we've got 20 teachers across each of those at each grade, right? That it gives some structure for similar approaches so that we don't have folks saying like, oh, school A is the one, oh, you're lucky, they never sign homework there, school C, look out, you're gonna have, right, like, it does help kind of set some general district-wide, so, but I'm just curious, like, is this, a framework that is helpful for our teaching staff, and I'm not sure that these numbers in particular, but having kind of time-based policies, is that something that is welcomed, or just like, oh, that's how we've always done it, and we're kind of trying to figure out the new way to write?
I think, in general, it is helpful for teachers to have, if there is an expectation, to have clarity around what the expectation is. And where there is flexibility, to know that there's flexibility and feel confident that they are supported in that flexibility, which we would like to give them, you know, both of those things so that they can feel comfortable doing what they need to do. So it's, when asking about homework, we were really all over the map when it, from teaching staff in these grades that, you know, from I solidly give this much homework every night, I believe in it, it makes a difference for my students, and I see it, to this is not something that I see making a big difference in student learning, and I only assign it, you know, when I'm required to do so, or when I think it's really necessary. So, it's a little more challenging in the conversations that were had to come to a consensus on that. But there was sort of consensus around allowing flexibility across the week, for them to have some discretion over what those assignments should be, but then also some support, you know, like, okay, well, then you let me know also what you think is appropriate as an assignment, so I can make sure I'm doing what we need to do, and then let me know what I can decide for myself.
I do think it's important to have some kind of indication, again, for the teachers, about, I mean, we do want there to be sustained level of homework at K through 5. I mean, the minutes, we can talk about whether or not there are numbers, but we definitely, I think, have to set expectations that you will have homework on a nightly basis to get used to that as they continue their education through middle and high school. If we're too kind of wishy-washy on this, my concern is that there will be a lot of, like, you know, was mentioned, a lot of schools like, oh yeah, they never assign homework. And we don't want that to kind of, I think, have a role. I think there should be some kind of overarching guideline. If we want to not include numbers, we should at least include language that indicates that on a nightly basis, students will have some kind of homework.
I'll use the word I when I say this, and I don't think that we necessarily need homework. And so I don't know if I necessarily do want something that is so forceful. Personally, I'll speak for myself as a board member. So I guess what I would be looking for from a homework policy, to the extent that we need something this detailed and don't just have the flexibility given to our teachers, would be something that would show that there is absolutely discretion, that some weeks you will have no homework, and that there are going to be other times when the class did great on something and there isn't homework needed. In my professional life, the worst thing is to have busy work that is not helpful to anyone and is only a hardship. And so that is not what our goal is. I don't think that's what we should be telling our teachers. I don't think we should be saying, well, it's 5 to 10 minutes. Make sure that your kindergartner who can't read or write needs to fill this out with their mom, right? And so I just think that we should think about how we can make this even more flexible, especially given what you said. When the principals were talking to the teachers, they did get a really wide range. Something I would like to see is what homework is, because I think the other thing, and maybe a reason why my experience as a parent has been slightly different from others, pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, my daughters almost never had homework, and they would frequently do it during class when they had extra time. Does that not count as homework? Does another parent see that and say, my child doesn't get their 50 minutes of homework? That's wrong. It's not wrong. They're still doing the same thing, but they had that extra time. And so again, that's flexibility that I think that we need reflected here, and our minutes don't capture. I'll stop it at that, but I guess I'll just say, not all of us think that we do need rigid homework policies.
And just to answer, I'm sorry, just to answer the question about how other districts have worded it when there wasn't, some of the notes that I have are just students are expected to complete homework assignments, period. Homework should not cause harm or interfere with responsibilities at home. Each student shall be responsible for completing homework assignments as directed. So those are also possibilities.
So I have no problem with being flexible and everything, but I think at a K through 5 level in particular, I mean, I remember this with a 14-year-old, they would do reflex math. That was a nightly thing, and yes, it seemed like busy work. It seemed like, doing 3 times 5 and, doing your times table, it seemed like busy work because, and they always told me, I know this. And I'm like, I know you know this, but it's reflex. You have to be able to like, not think about it and do it in your head, but actually just like know it. And that I think is, and look, I'm an engineer, so maybe it's a math thing with me, but I mean, that's just, math excites me, it does.
I guess that's what, I mean, listen, I don't wanna get in an argument with anyone, I'm not gonna change anybody's philosophy in life, but certainly when you're doing your multiplication tables in 3rd grade, repetition helps. When you're in 1st grade, I don't know what would help you, maybe nothing. Maybe, I don't know what repetitious activities you're doing there, probably just reading.
You read.
And you're reading in school. Listen, I just, I don't think that, I certainly do believe that we need to get rid of the word expectation, that we need to have this be, if we're going to include minutes, have it something that says that it's not every day, that there will be times where homework is assigned. There will be times that homework will be around 50 minutes or something like that.
So one of the
Fine.
things that I don't want to lose sight of is that I appreciated you saying that, Ms. Saxa, excuse me, you saying that teachers want the flexibility and they want to be supported, but they also want to have some sort of framework and guideline, and so I don't want to lose that. And so perhaps there's a way for us to provide them with that support that's needed, but still providing this flexibility here with simply just changing the word. So even if we were to keep the time frame, because it sounds like that's helpful for them to have that there, the sentence before generally the average daily time expectations, maybe put a sentence before that, something that says, while assigning homework is based upon the lesson or curriculum or at the discretion of the teacher, something that supports them but provides flexibility and leads up to there's a possibility for you having homework at X amount of time for a time length. The other thing is that I would really like us to strongly revisit that approximately 3 hours that was mentioned earlier.
I agree with that.
So maybe it's an up to 3 hours, or you know what I mean? Something that just,
It's nuts.
it provides the support, it gives the flexibility, but it also just sounds a little bit more positive if we kind of lead into it differently. But right now, I feel like it's kind of backed into a corner. And I would like our language to be positive and inspiring for everyone that's using the policy. So forward thinking, how can we reword that sentence to still have the same meaning, but just a different context there?
I think we should also have a line in there that not every night will have homework.
What-
It should not be an expectation that it's every day. How many of your kids are doing homework on Fridays? I'm just saying, that's a day of the week. And so
But Sunday night into Monday, right? Like there is that.
also shouldn't happen in some of our opinions.
And some of the students said.
When you get to high school,
Yeah,
I'm looking at
yeah.
the high school kids, they're like, yeah.
Public comments loud after all this, you can hop up there.
Might I
Turn the
see-
camera
Well,
around in a minute.
One thing also I know.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
suggest, since we start off with a weekly framework for elementary, could we consider a weekly range, not necessarily saying it is every night, but over the course of a week might help. I also think it could be helpful, to not have, the expectations narrowed down to 5-minute increments, right? Like that building on the upper end, but to allow that lower end
Up
to
to?
be up to, or
Even just around, just have it like be an approximate on each
Approximate.
time, right? I agree with that, because it does look like a minimum maximum when it's neither one, right? It's a guideline.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, that's what I was saying, up
I
to
like the
15
weekly
minutes.
one
makes
too,
sense,
because
or
I do,
around, yeah.
not every night should have homework.
or the
And-
same amount, or right, you said like
Right.
different things come up, so yeah, just looking for a way to keep the flexibility, but some parameters. The other one, and I'm thinking of the students in the room who are helping with filming the meeting. It says whenever possible, no more than 2 major pre-announced exams per day should be scheduled. And I'm curious what, like how that plays out. Like for the exams at the end of the semester, there are blocks, right? So day 1 is block 1 and then 2. And so that's kind of seen, right? You see how there's only 2 that day. But if a student has a history and a math and an English class in their 4-block schedule, and just by coincidence, they all have tests on the same day, does a student have the right to raise their hand and say, wait, this is my 3rd test on the same day, can I have one be rescheduled or something? Is there some coordination that happens across departments, or that a student can initiate something that doesn't happen just at those exam times?
I will say the place where that possibility is built in is the middle school, because they do have teams.
Yeah.
And so they can talk through, okay, I'm giving my test on Friday, I give my social studies test next week. At the high school, there's so many combinations of teachers in a schedule that kind of coordination does not and could not have, it's not their fault, it could not happen. And so I'm not aware of any vehicle that the child would bring to the attention to the teacher, this is my 3rd exam for the day, or my 3rd test on the.
And I think that's the challenge with the homework at the high school level too, is I don't, like in practice, how do we even monitor the 3-hour concept? Because it's not like those teachers have really any ability to talk with one another, because again, there's no kind of scheduling that they're consistent. So I was curious, Dr. Rushi, when did the block schedule happen at the high school? Do you know? When we shifted to that?
Dr. McKay, I was working at Radnor.
Okay.
In Radnor at that point in time, so that goes back to 2000.
Okay, so this was then, the 3-hour written is after the block schedule, so that's
Yeah.
interesting. I was thinking that
Yeah,
might have
that's
been
been in
left
place
over
for a
from
long,
8 classes a
long
day.
time.
Okay. I really, I think similar for other people, I don't love the high school language. The hard thing is because I just don't know how we monitor it. Given the ways that the teachers are not necessarily on any team together or working together, unless we had some kind of a guidance around no class gives more than individually this much, so it can't add up. Like when we get stuck in the numbers, I don't know how we actually enforce this at the high school level.
So can I ask a bigger picture question, is why are we, the board, mandating what teachers are doing? And why would that not be in an administrative regulation? Like, shouldn't we as a board give the authority to the superintendent and her delegate to make those decisions and provide that guidance to teacher? I guess that's not that we shouldn't have a policy that we as a board think that homework is important for all the reasons sort of, listed at the beginning, but I guess, like, it seems to me like we're really in the weeds here, and that seems to me like not our purview. Like, it feels like we're micromanaging teachers, and I feel like that's, as a
I
board.
think that's what the challenge is.
Right, and so, and that's kind of, I guess that's where I'm feeling is like, we're all debating this, but none of us are, well, I guess.
Well, currently teaching.
Some maybe teachers, but, yeah, I guess like to me, it feels like we are maybe a little in the weeds here, and some of this should maybe be taken out and replaced with an authority section where we give the authority to dictate some of these ranges and things like that to the superintendent.
I think if we just make it more general, like, cause it does feel like micromanaging when you have 5-minute increments of something, right? And so I don't know if we necessarily need a large administrative regulation, because the problem is still going to exist, which is that you have dozens of classes, 7 buildings, right? And multiple age levels, multiple ability levels within classrooms, right? And so the
And what
teachers, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, the more, I hear you that if they want to assign homework, they want to understand what the average is and what the appropriate level is, and that's fine. We can have some sort of guideline for when homework is assigned. Around 5 minutes will be given to kindergartners, right? That type of thing. And so we can have that type of language, but I do think that it's not just me, maybe, that wants to soften this language and have more flexibility, have less mandated, less of these expectation language. And so, I think I just don't know, I don't think an AR would solve the problems. I think that having softened language with clear guidelines that are clear when they're saying they're not meant to be mandates, right?
Yeah, fair enough, but I'm just thinking about the, sort of the use of this policy going forward. And, as we're talking about modernizing assessment and preparing contemporary citizens and things might change. And I don't want to have to go back to this policy every single year and say like, oh, well, now we're thinking about homework differently, or like every couple years and like, oh, guidelines have changed. Like, I think having it in an AR and giving the superintendent and her designees that responsibility and that oversight to kind of make those changes as they see fit. I don't know, like that just seems to me a little bit more flexible and maybe appropriate. And especially as we are thinking about more modernized assessment, like, I don't know that these timelines are, I don't know, like some of the things that we think about as homework may not be what a parent, like you're seeing a more modernized assessment come home, like that might not be what a parent thinks of as homework. So then they're like, oh, my kid's not getting homework, but it's, so
Yeah.
does that make sense? I don't know. So that's why I was just thinking like for future use of this policy, I guess, moving some of the more specific things to specific components to an AR and allowing the district to sort of update that as needed, as opposed to having to come back and talk about this, as.
I think we can accomplish that with, and I forget who said it, but somebody suggested having a weekly, like, and maybe you can include something like, while homework is not likely to, or while homework is not, mandated every night, a weekly average may be around, and then we could get the flexibility in there you're talking about, where it's up to the school superintendents and so forth. Yet it does indicate like you are expected to give something to kids, and I mean I think that would capture, hopefully, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm not putting words in my mouth here or anything, but I think language like that might capture what you were looking for with the maybe not quite, but it would provide that increased flexibility. And because I know, I mean, when my kids come home and I say, what do you have for homework, and they say nothing, I'm like, so not having it every night is like, I think a good thing to put in there, but then do put in something like, you do want to have your child have something when they get home, but based on teachers and the child's abilities or teachers' expectations of the child's abilities.
So I propose that clearly whatever we do is not be ready to go to the full board.
Well, you
for
have a lot of clear
September
direction,
7th.
I think, from the discussion tonight,
So I'm going to suggest that, and if my colleagues feel different, please speak up, that we just try to process what we've heard tonight and put it together, either as the policy, take it as a policy, or put it as a policy with administrative regs and bring that back. Because if we have the language down and people are comfortable with the language, then the conversation becomes, is it policy or is it administrative regs? So if we chunk it and try to approach it, and I think the first thing is for us to look at the language. So if we look at something that incorporate or includes more flexibility, maybe even talks about what homework is.
Yeah, right.
And the purpose that homework can serve, and, less of a mandate, as Dr. Crispin was saying, kind of soften the language, but provide those guidelines that teachers have said would be helpful for them. So we can do that and bring it back here.
And some of that is in the section 5, homework is an aid to scholastic
Yeah, we can
success, right? Like
maybe
that
move
kind
some
of,
things around and.
emphasizes that it's a learning activity that should be a vital part of their educational development, not busy work, not that, but, yeah, I think there have been some
Maybe move that
Good,
up.
yeah.
conversation on this one here too.
I do, yeah, I think some other things that could move around, like I really like the line in the secondary level that says a hard and fast rule concerning the ideal amount of time students should spend on homework is impractical and unrealistic, and I think that applies to the entire policy, not just to the
Not just
secondary
the-
level.
Yeah.
Because as we've discussed, you know, I mean, that's literally the purpose of MTSS, right, is to try and meet students where they are, and I just think that homework should be similar. And whether, even if it is on a whole class level, well, a whole class could be going at something different than a different class, and, you know, it's fine if Coral's class has a different amount of homework than Emmy's class, right? And so, you know, that, a hard and fast rule just shouldn't happen at any level.
I actually think that entire paragraph is a great way to just introduce the homework policy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it speaks to a student at any grade level and any achievement level. What's the purpose for assigning homework? To me, that paragraph says that.
Mm-hmm.
We will work on it.
So now we've given you guys homework.
There you go.
Take as much time as you need. You
Not three, not 3 hours a
on
night.
Friday
Longer than
night.
50 minutes.
All I'm saying,
On
3 hours
Friday
on
night.
Friday night, okay?
That 3 hours is terrifying. I mean,
hours?
that really
Friday
is.
Or Sunday, President Wiedemann says, either one.
Can I ask one follow-up question for Ms. Satsa? In the high school level, are there, because there isn't like team situations, if there are teachers teaching though the same course, we'll say, you know, English 10 or whatever, do they match up on what their expectations are? So one student isn't in one section that gets hours and hours of homework every week, and another student is in another section at the same level that is doing very differently. Is there any kind of coordination between those same courses but taught by different teachers?
Yeah, they are not lockstep, but they do come to agreement on the assignments and assessments that will fall into sort of the major category. So those are what they consider to be core assignments. But you might have one teacher who assigns, you know, a little bit more homework than another teacher. They do talk to each other in professional learning communities and align what they're doing. They have monthly department meetings where they have the opportunity to do that as well. I wouldn't say that every single one is completely in step, but they certainly do have some conversation of, you know, all of the English 10 teachers.
So
Yeah.
like there isn't a common syllabus
Oh, there
amongst those?
is. There's a common syllabus, and then there are sort of these common assessments and common major assignments, which could be done as homework. But there are other minor assessments and assignments that could be individual to the teacher. Our general rule is we want about 85 to be core, which is sort of a guaranteed experience, and about 15% might be at the discretion of the teacher.
Okay, thank you.
And I imagine there are, like, again, the teacher's flexibility, discretion, like what you do in class or work on at home. Some teachers may flip that and have,
Yep.
let's all read together, and then you do something at home, or read that and then come in and be prepared to talk. And that could look like different assignments, even though you're covering the same thing. So,
Right, yeah.
yeah, it is a hard one, and it's interesting and helpful to get all of the different perspectives from board members and our administration representing the teachers. And yeah, I think the goal is here to have something that reflects best practices and something we can implement, and that is always looking at how we can best help our students learn and have mastery over the content. And we'll continue this conversation at an upcoming policy meeting.
Great. Okay, so I think we'll move on. And I'm gonna switch it up a little bit and go to 211, student accident insurance, because it looks easy.
Can I ask a big picture question on this one? Why? Why must we require that students have health insurance to attend our school? Is that a legal requirement? I'm just practically why?
So it's actually, this is for extracurriculars, I believe.
Athletics and
Yeah,
extracurriculars.
at
Oh.
school,
Athletic
student
hours, right?
participation in the athletic and extracurricular programs of the school.
Just moved.
So yeah, it's not a condition of just a general attendance, but it's extracurriculars, and I think there was deeper level conversation with the business office at a certain point, Dr. Rushi, where I think what we learned is that there's an ability to purchase at a certain cost. Is that correct? Am I saying that accurately? But with regard to the extracurriculars and particularly within the athletics forum, my understanding is the requirement is that the student has to have some form of additional coverage. And then if they don't, we make it available to them at a reduced cost. And then there are certain students who will purchase it anyway, so they may have their own health insurance through their families, but then they'll have almost like an additional umbrella coverage, if you will, for the athletic season.
Okay. So just again, thinking about how a policy is enforced, I'm just curious, as I filled out many a form like this, I fill it out at the beginning of the year. It's not asked again, but life changes, jobs change, health insurance changes. I haven't been asked to fill it out again. So is that something that, if this is something that we're requiring, is it something that we need to be asking parents? Do you know what I mean?
To update?
I just don't know. I mean, I'll be honest, it makes me uncomfortable because I feel like it does exclude some students whose family may not have health insurance. It's a very complicated, expensive thing in our country. So I'm just curious, what we wanted, if we're gonna require it, are we also then going to monitor that beyond the initial forms, or is it just that initial form at the beginning of the year?
It's my understanding it's the initial form at the beginning of the year. There's no recheck on that. If there's a family, for whom the child is not insured, then we would direct them to the CHIP program and work with our nursing staff. Our nursing staff and social workers work with them to get that.
Okay.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, though? This is student accident insurance, which is different than health insurance, right? So it's an additional need.
The way it's worded, it makes it sound like it is, but it's just medical insurance.
Well, no, there's a difference, though, because you can
Oh.
have medical insurance and then purchase a supplemental student accident insurance.
Sure, but I think that it's confusing in the language. You're right to bring that up, because at least on the forms I've filled out, I have never filled out for accident insurance.
Right.
We don't have accident insurance.
That's
Maybe
what I
we
was
should
trying to.
call it something like insurance for student participation in extracurricular programs.
But I think you want to be careful with that, because if you right now Google student accident insurance, those types of policies will come up. And so I think we want to call it the type of insurance that it is, but we want to explain that this is not medical insurance. You can specifically call a broker and say, I want student accident insurance, and he or she will know exactly what you're talking about. So let's just explain what it is in comparison to what we're thinking about or what
But
something
that's not
about.
what we're requiring. We're not requiring people to call up a broker and get student accident insurance, right?
But
I
that's what
think
the
she's saying
language
that's
says.
a thing,
It is
so-
available, but I'm just saying that's not a requirement.
But I want to be clear about that, because when typically for athletes, no, it's not a requirement, but we're saying that it's an option. So I want to be careful about changing the language of actually the name of what it is, because that makes a difference between you getting your Aetna enrollment versus, yes, calling a broker and getting student accident insurance. So I'm definitely uncomfortable with calling it something else besides student accident insurance, because that's actually what it is. We should just explain what this coverage is.
Okay, I'll need to get more information for that.
I feel like
to
we
provide
had
that.
this conversation when this was at the committee meeting before, and
Yep.
the distinction between health insurance, is this policy saying health insurance is a requirement to participate in athletic or extracurricular? Is there a distinction with student accident insurance? I think there are just some clarifying terms and concepts in here that would be helpful to to figure out what this is actually requiring, and then how that affects, families in the district with kids who do the extracurriculars.
The way that I read it, the only requirement is to have insurance for medical care. And then everything else is you may do it. The only shall here is,
It's actually in the guidelines, the last
Right.
paragraph there's the shall, that if they don't have
if you don't have private health insurance. Right.
Yeah, I think we just need to be more clear. Like the title even of the policy, and be a little bit more clear on what we're saying is required to participate and what is, if you're interested in this. So the district is, because what you described before, Dr. Rushi, was the district helping families who may
Helping.
not have medical insurance to be able to get onto CHIP or other
The-
things. But that's not
is the
accident.
last one.
Yeah, so then the second paragraph, does the district also have accident insurance policy? Because it says through the district,
Right.
may purchase through the district.
Yeah, and the sentence that's in authority doesn't sound like authority. It's just odd.
Right.
Like that's not the source of our authority. It's just saying that we can, that it's available. I don't know. The paragraph headings don't make any sense. Because then in the guidelines, it says what's mandatory.
Oh, yeah, because, the last sentence does say it's required.
Yeah,
If you don't
Mhm.
have,
If
if you don't have
it,
health
yeah.
insurance.
right.
It's not required for.
Yeah, I think there just
especially
needs to be
with-
rewording. It's
Yeah.
confusing.
I mean, especially because you can, buy health insurance now from the ACA. I think most people have it, and so very few, I think it would be very few people who would need this accident insurance, but it is required if you don't otherwise have insurance. So calling that section guidelines doesn't make any sense.
And then I think it's the question of how we are enforcing that and monitoring it, right? Is it part of, what students submit? I know we have like health forms that you have to submit, like physical, forms to participate in sports. I'm not sure the extent to which this insurance is collected and confirmed, and I think, just that kind of practical application of it would be helpful too.
Yeah,
We'll get that information.
that one's gonna come back to committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that one was gonna go faster, but it didn't.
I actually think 137 might go faster.
Oh, okay. I looked at that one and there was a lot.
Yeah, I
Let's
did
do
too.
it.
It's like green and
Last
red.
one, I'm calling it, guys. We're not going for two more.
Okay.
707, school facilities use. Sorry.
That's gonna take,
I'll talk to you in October.
that one will take time,
Yeah.
for a discussion. Is it 137? Yep. 137 is the policy, that addresses, what we would call homeschool, so students who are homeschooled. And the sections that were included in there pertain to how we approach student interest in extracurricular activities, in co-curricular activities, and a participation in the career and technical education program. And what's been done here is to take each of those areas and put them into, into the administrative regulations, instead of having separate administrative regulations for extracurric, co-curric, and career and tech. So it makes for a lengthy AR, but it has it all together.
Okay, and so in the policy itself, there's not a whole lot, if anything, that's really being proposed to change. It's adding the definitions. A lot of these come from code about what Pennsylvania permits and requires, right? So the policy is, Is that correct, that I see this language highlighted in green, but
It's defining those terms.
I guess I just don't understand what the policy is.
so I think
Just that
For
they're,
students who are homeschooled, Jen?
well, no, I just, where is, like, what states the policy
Oh.
here? Because it's just, is like, there's an
So it's-
authority sentence, and then there's a bunch of definitions, and then we say the superintendent can develop ARs in accordance with this policy. But like, what policy?
I
Right?
hear what you're saying, yeah.
Like
Mhm. So
it's-
like the district will provide,
Will do
you
what?
know,
Yeah,
will
right.
comply with, all rules and requirements regarding home education. That's the policy.
Yeah, I
And
think
then
we need
here's
kind
the
of
definition,
authority.
the
We
authority.
need something else.
Yeah, it's missing like a
Yeah.
purpose
It's
or
missing a
Maybe
directive.
the
Actual
strike-through
policy.
needs to stay in there.
Yeah, I
It is
mean-
the policy of the board to permit home education pursuant to law enabling students to study at home in accordance with the board policy. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe we need to keep that.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Because otherwise,
That
there's
is.
no policy.
Mhm.
There's nothing for the superintendent
There it is.
to take and do.
so we'll reinstate that.
maybe with a different heading, we have authority, definitions, delegation of
Mhm.
responsibility, and then,
I think it's okay to be an authority, but it needs to be, something needs
Yeah.
to be there.
Under definitions, home education program is listed twice. It's the first definition and then it's the fourth definition, so I
Wasn't
think
crossed
those
out.
should
Defined
be
two different ways.
combined, yeah. So combine those, I guess. And then hearing examiner shall not be an officer or shall be an officer. It says shall not, but then what is it?
Yeah, I think like, what is a hearing examiner? And so if things first say, what is a hearing examiner? And then say who it can or cannot be. Because otherwise, I don't, like, what kind of hearing? What are they examining?
Do you want to know the answer to those questions?
Nope.
Or- Okay.
Find out when we read this
I want to
next.
find out in the policy.
Find out when we read it next time.
And then, so where, sorry, you said this, Dr. Rushi. The AR is very long.
Yes.
Where did all of this language come from previously?
You didn't have it.
We did, right, okay, so this is all new. It wasn't, because I thought you mentioned something
Well,
about other
some of
policies, or
it-
was it just about
some of it was
practice?
cut out.
Some of it was cut out of, it was in the policy
Okay.
itself, the general guidelines.
And is it correct that some of this has been refined through state code, more definition of what students who are homeschooled or home educated are entitled to access classes, services, programs?
Something else to keep in mind when we're rewriting this, so the AR uses home education supervisor, but the policy just says supervisor, so just make sure that the terms are aligned.
The AR has some of both.
Yeah, actually,
supervisor
there's
and-
both.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Make sure they're referring to the same person and then change that, yeah.
And then,
Uh-huh.
and then it's also the supervisor of the home education program, which may or may not be the same person.
Mhm.
Yeah. So then the what wasn't pulled from the policy and that's in the AR, is that just based on district practice? Is it based on other policies from other districts, or where does the rest of this come from?
It
So-
is what we do.
Yeah, right. Good.
So PSBA released, as Dr. Rushi said, I think it was 3 proposed ARs, and then the administration reviewed those for the practices of the district. But a lot of it's, honestly, a lot of it's statutory modifications, so you're kind of stuck with it, and that's why it is so long.
So that's why it's good to know, because, there's some things that we can change and some things we can't change, right? And so it's always good to know if the language is in here, even if we hate it, we are stuck with it. I think this one needs some revisions as well.
We advanced one tonight, didn't we?
We did, in the first half hour, we moved forward so
So I
many
got here, you're
things.
saying, and then.
We got a lot, but we
And
And
you're
then
going to a halt?
as soon as Dave got here.
Coincidence?
You know, we went low hanging fruit though.
I'm not trying to be,
teasing.
I'm not trying to be monkey wrench, but you know.
I'm teasing.
I think we got a lot accomplished.
Mhm. I think I
We've
have
got a lot
6
to move forward, and
Yes.
we have homework, no pun intended.
3 hours.
Right.
I agree. I thought this was really
We got
productive.
more than Justin and I thought.
I didn't, no. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I don't think anyone in the audience wants to speak. There's nobody here. Oh, wow.
You
we
guys have,
comments?
it's about homework.
Yes, there is, we are going to stop the review of the policies now. There is a time on our agenda for public comment, but seeing nobody in attendance, except for the students who are working our tech equipment, I think we can assume there is no public comment and conclude the work of the committee. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion.